Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Pedalshift Project. The Pedalshift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments around the bike touring lifestyle. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride, let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshift.net/177, and you can email the show, pedalshift@pedalshift.net, or call the voicemail hotline, 202-930-1109, and check Pedalshift out on all the socials as well. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 177th edition of the Pedalshift Project. My name is Tim Mooney, and I am super psyched to have you here back for the second of two parts on my tour of the C&O towpath during the hottest and the muggiest stretch of the summer of 2019. A reminder, check out the packing episode in Pedalshift number 175. Go for the ride preview there as well, and Pedalshift number 176 for part one of this tour. Turned out a little bit differently than I anticipated. It was hot. It was muggy. There were thunderstorms. How did it all end? Let's find out. Good morning from Little Pool Hiker Biker Campsite, just south of Hancock, Maryland, on the banks of the Potomac between Big Pool and the Potomac River, and you may be able to make out the dulcet tones of I-70 in the background there. I am getting out a little later than I would have preferred, given the fact that today's forecast is essentially a carbon copy of yesterday's, plus I am racing time a little bit due to storm activity that is very likely to hit sometime in the late afternoon to early evening. My strong preference would be, as I mentioned on a past chapter here, is to get there to camp, and my plan is to be at Huckleberry Hill, which is my favorite one, I think, on the whole trail. Get there and well before, so that I can maybe even have a touch of hammock time to cool down and have the tent set up long before the rain starts, so that when it does, I can duck in. Sun is out, and when you're going to DC in the summer, I didn't mention this yesterday, but you basically take a face full of it for most of the ride in the mornings. So I think that this may, it's not a hard preference, it's a soft preference, but because I do tend to ride mostly in the mornings, I would say that my soft preference would be to be starting in the opposite direction. Just something to kind of bookmark away. I never had a preference before because I didn't feel that there was really any factor that made direction an issue until this trip. And it's funny, I've certainly ridden this direction before, but I guess I just never really thought about it. I'd prefer to have the sun at my back than in my face. I am taking a small change of clothing, or I should rephrase that. I'm wearing a different set of clothing today than yesterday. Yesterday I was wearing one of my new Columbia button-up shirts over a wicking shirt. Today I'm back to my sort of classic hot weather setup, which is probably familiar with a lot of folks who have been following the show. A wicking, athletic t-shirt and my sun sleeves, plus quick drying shorts and quick drying underwear. And basically, I want to try to minimize sun exposure even more today. And the sun sleeves have a cooling effect when you wear them, which I think is pretty good because they do allow for the evaporative cooling to happen. Last night was pretty rough in terms of the heat. unlike the night before where there was an ever so slight breeze that would blow through the two closed but there are screen doors on my tent. Last night had nothing. And because the humidity was so high and the dew point was so high and continues to be high, it was rough. The evaporative cooling towel does not do nearly as much work when it's that humid, I found. I resorted to unrolling it completely. What I have been doing is wearing it around my neck, kind of rolled up, which I think is sort of the way you see it used a lot. What I ended up doing for a small part of the evening was to unroll it completely, and it's kind of like the size of 2 sheets of paper side by side, give or take. I don't know how big that would be, but in any event, I put that down over me, like almost like the smallest, most ridiculous blanket ever, and that did have more because there was more surface area to evaporate what it could. So it was rough. The weather forecasters are suggesting that you stay inside yesterday and today and try to limit your exercise. Well, that's clearly not happening. But I can understand why they're giving that advice. It's not terrible. I did yesterday go through, I don't think I mentioned this, all 4 liters of that water. And that was exactly what I needed. But, you know, it's a little off-putting when you're 6-7 miles away and you have poured the last of your water reserves into your water bottle. So you're down to basically your last water bottle. Now, it worked out fine, but I think I'm going to be drinking a lot between here and Williamsport, which is about 20 miles. And if memory serves, there is a water fountain there. So I think I'm going to liberally drink this morning and then top up once again when I'm there, just to make double sure that I've got plenty of water. My plan is not to stop there for lunch. It's just a little too close. I'd like to get closer to 30 miles in, so I'm not sure exactly where I'm going to stop. But the flip side to all of that is Shepherdstown's the last spot where I can really get food for dinner. I already have my mind set on going to Maria's Taqueria there, if only to cool off as well. Unlike yesterday, I will not have an opportunity to shower, so that definitely brought the core temperature way down. So at least I can cool down at Maria's before continuing on. I think that's going to be the one challenge today, is that I don't have a specified spot to cool down the whole body. I'm hoping that I can do that perhaps at Huckleberry Hill and that I'll have enough time. One downside to the showers that are forecast is I don't think it's going to bring a ton of temperature relief. Usually it does, but I don't know, we'll just have to see. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that was of note yesterday, or last night, excuse me. I set up the hammock again because only 4 miles of riding from the town of Hancock, but by the time I got there, I was very warm and sweating again. So I'm sure my internal body temperature was high, but not as high as it was when I got into Hancock. So I don't think I undid everything, but it certainly got me going again. So again, I hung that hammock and set up the tent, and then went back into the hammock until the end of light, basically, hoping that would cool me down, and it did. Then getting into the tent again, as I'm sure many of you experience on a hot summer day, no matter how much ventilation you've got, and I've got a lot of ventilation in the tent, it still traps in your heat. I like to put my tarp on just to be on the safe side, even if there's no forecast rain. But what I do is I open up both sides completely and roll it up. So that's a large surface area for heat to come in. I've also pegged out the front and the rear, so things do get, if there's air movement at all, it does move in and out of the tent. Like last night, not so much. So theme, once again, hot and sultry. Normally, as many of you know, in August, when I do a tour, which is fairly typical, I usually go on some multi-day ride in August. I tend to be out on the West Coast. And this year, for a variety of reasons, I thought, well, I think I'd like to stay closer to home. And, you know, if I eliminate travel days on both ends, you know, it shortens the amount of time I'm away. It's a less expensive tour. I love the C&O. You know, all of those factors kind of line up. And the one thing that I didn't really kind of bank on was just how miserable it was going to be. But this is the hottest stretch of weather I think that we've had the entire year. For multiple days worth of heat plus humidity. But on the flip side, what is great, or what has been great, is it has not rained on me yet. So trail conditions are fantastic. I think because of the inhuman conditions, I think that it's kept some people away, so the trail's a little quieter, which I don't mind at all. Not even kind of local folks out for a walk or whatever, because why the hell would you do that? Why would you be out in these conditions, you crazy, crazy person? I just took another cobweb to the face. Spiders, they love the heat. They love the mornings. And I am the bane of their web's existence. I kept finding spider silk. Oh, there's another one. On me all day yesterday, even well into the afternoon and evening. It's on my bike and everything. It's pretty funny. Like I said, that might be how I go. You never know. An angry spider lands on me after I destroy its carefully created web. And it turns out, without knowing, I've been allergic to spiders all along, and boom, done. Probably not. River looks very beautiful this morning. That is another option. I have my bathing suit on the exterior of the bike because it was still a little damp. So I may consider jumping in the river. It's been several days since a rain, so the likelihood of there being any outflow issues from any of the towns, because very often that's where a lot of the real goo gets into the river. It's extremely low that there would be any sewer overflow. The only thing that I want to watch is to make sure that I'm in a spot along the river where it's actually moving. I think I've mentioned the cyanobacteria issues that so many places have been having lately. It tends to happen in ponds and lakes, but it's actually been taking the lives of a lot of area dogs. People are going to, parks and whatnot and letting their dogs frolic in the same ponds and lakes that they've been used to. Unfortunately, they grab the cyanobacteria toxin while they're in there, and it's over very quickly, and not in a nice way for them. Boy, I feel like this has been a very dark edition of the pod, or of this chapter of the tour journal. Lots of death talk today. I'm reading The Goldfinch, and by reading I mean the audiobook. And of course, if you're familiar with it, the main plot, and I don't think this is very spoilery, it begins with an explosion in an art gallery, and there's a fair amount of death in it. So maybe that's what it is. Oh well. So, trail, very good in this section. I'll tell you, this is another part of the trail that tends to be eschewed a little bit in lieu of the final section of the Western Maryland Rail Trail, which runs parallel and over to my left on your podcast listening device. That is, of course, paved, and C&O haters love grabbing the Western Maryland Rail Trail. But they're actually missing out on one of the nicer sections of it, to be honest. So, I think around mile marker 112, so I've got maybe another 6 or so miles. That's where the Western Maryland Rail Trail ends, and essentially, if you want to keep going towards DC, your only option is to rejoin the C&O. But this is a section today that will include some resurfaced areas. It will also include one of the more interesting spots, Big Slackwater, which is a long concrete edifice that Park Service had installed because of flooding. In fact, that portion of the trail had been washed away long ago. And when I first started riding the trail about 10 years ago, are we looking at that? Give or take. It didn't, the C&O just wasn't a continuous trail. There was a semi-permanent road route there, which was fine, but wasn't all that, wasn't exciting, wasn't terribly awesome. It's still in place because Big Slackwater will sometimes be underwater, but because it's concrete, trail doesn't wash away. It'll be interesting to see if they choose to do anything like that for some of the more problematic sections. I don't think that that's likely, because they do seem to be going to some Great Allegheny Passage style surface for the newer resurfaced areas. But those were getting rave reviews from the folks that I've been talking to. So I'm looking forward to seeing those after a summer's worth of weather and settling. Of course, I rode it in May, and there were parts that, frankly, I think the gravel had been put down, or the limestone, or whatever it is, whatever the surface is. I mean, it had been put down only within a matter of days or weeks. So it'll be nice to see what a more compacted, settled version of it was. It was just fine, but I'm looking forward to riding it. One other thing of note, I've been seeing a ton of deer, and I say that just as I look to my right, and there are 2 white-tailed deer, and a fair amount of leaves on the ground. Now, of course, the foliage isn't changing by any stretch of the imagination, but I have noticed that as early as August, some trees, and it looks like they're maple, and one other type that has kind of a heart-shaped leaf, which I'll have to go back and look up, but definitely maple, I'm seeing some on the ground here, are shedding, probably in anticipation of the full shedding that will be happening later in the fall. Fall, a much better time to ride the C&O. For a variety of reasons. I will say right now, it's probably in the, we'll call it mid-70s right now, and I don't think it's going to really crank up for at least another couple hours. So I think I can get to Williamsport without too much of a hassle. It'll be cool. That'll be not quite half of my ride. I've got a 57-mile ride, plus any mileage I do in Shepherdstown, which is measurable because I have to go up a fairly steep embankment, probably when it's going to be at its hottest, and then cross over into Shepherdstown to get my dinner. That will be uncomfortable, but I will make it happen. And I do have lunch with me, so I'm not beholden to any particular town. In fact, if it feels right, if it feels like it's going to be okay, I may skip the watering in Williamsport if I'm feeling strong and good and my supplies are still high. I may consider skipping that because it'll only be an additional, let's see here, 25 miles from there until, about 25 miles until Shepherdstown. And of course I do have the backup of all of the handled water spots around here at the campground. So that may be the alternate plan, especially if I want to keep up with the cool. If the weather's still cool, it may behoove me to get an extra 5 miles further in the cool rather than take the half-hour break that I would anticipate it would take in Williamsport. All right, well, that is a lot of rambling. That was probably the darkest chapter of any tour journal ever. I will chat with you from further on down the trail. From the Cumberland Valley Hiker-Biker Campsite, it is midday-ish, mid-ride-ish for day 2, around mile marker 95, give or take. Went through my first of a downed tree over the trail. Apparently there are some on the other side of Harper's Ferry that I'm going to have to be dealing with, according to a rider who just went through. That I'll deal with tomorrow, no big deal. The tree that was down was very low and it was pretty easy to get over, so I'm hoping that the other trees are similarly easy. Sometimes you end up having situations where it's easier to put your bike and push it under. Sometimes it's better to lift it over. It just sort of depends on your energy level and the spot of the tree. I ate my sub from last night. Pro tip, don't get anything with mayonnaise if it's going to be sitting overnight. Of course, the bread gets a little bit soggy, but after half a day's worth of riding, I didn't really care all that much, and I've got that in me. I am pretty much done with Subway for a little while. It's great because it's consistent. It's just not the best food in the world, but it is relatively inexpensive and keeps pretty well in a pannier, even on a hot day, and overnight, as it turned out with this one. I've got about, 20 miles or so until Shepherdstown, and my intention is to try to bang that out as relatively steadily as I can. And then I will try to figure out a way to cool down. In fact, from a timing perspective, as I'm looking at the weather app, things are looking a little bit better for maybe missing the rain altogether. I am dubious on that. It's just too hot with too much energy in the air, too much moisture. I think it's going to rain at some point, and it would be in my best interest not to dawdle too much, but I need to be mindful of the fact that I will need to get my core body temperature down. And especially if it doesn't rain tonight, it's going to take some doing. So I know that there are a couple of decent swimming spots in the river along the way here. The river is very still at this point, though, and I really would prefer to be in a spot where it's at least moving a little bit. Not rapids by any stretch, nothing that would kind of be an issue if I slipped, and get pulled any place, not by any stretch. But I would like to maybe figure out a way to cool off with some water in some way, shape, or form. Of course, there's always the pannier trick, which I'm always willing to do and may consider doing over in the Harper's Ferry area, depending on how I'm feeling. Feeling a little unsettled. I mean, anytime you're pushing yourself in heat like this, especially over a second day, your system is not going to be taking to digesting food very well because it's wanting to use the water in your system for cooling yourself down. So right now I've got this big rock of food in me right now. So I'm taking care to make sure I have plenty of water to allow my system to digest that. So I can utilize it for the next several hours. Figure, for the most part, it's about 3 hours of riding between here and where I'll end up camping. Again, about 2 hours or so. It's about 2/3 of that, 30 miles, before I get to Shepherdstown. And a quick little break there, and it's just going to be straight up hot. But I will want to stop there because that's the only real place to get food that is between here and there. It's just how it is. Yeah, the nice thing is Shepherdstown is really nice and worth crossing the river, therefore. I haven't really talked much about the bicycle during all of this. It's been part of it is that it's the kind of thing that if you don't have to talk about your bike, it generally means things are going pretty good. I did re-lube my chain right before day 1, and that has been perfectly fine. It's been performing really nicely, shifts really nicely. Just no complaints at all. My headset, I think, is a little too tight. There's a part of me that thinks that I may want to spend some time after I'm done recording this and do a little bit of loosening because it's getting squeaky. I tend to have a problem, the opposite problem. It tends to be too loose, but I think I over-tightened it the last time, and so I'm going to play around with it just a bit to see if I can get that to be a little bit better for the rest of this ride. It's nice and cool in the shade, but I know that I'm not going to be in the shade as much in certain stretches here, so we'll just kind of see how it goes. Temperature is just going to keep going up and up and up. We're looking at feels like temperatures in triple digits, and that's, again, the theme of the ride. I hate to harp on it, but that's the biggest challenge of this particular ride. Trail conditions are excellent, really, really good. Zero complaints that I've had so far. The one tree down was probably the most crazy thing I've had to deal with on this entire ride, and that's just fantastic for the C&amp. So that's about it for the midday. Next time you hear from me, I'm probably going to be a little less energetic and a lot hotter, and well, that's just how it's going to be. From mile marker, we'll call it 63, but it's really 62.9 if you're playing the home game, at Huckleberry Hill Campground near Harpers Ferry, West Virginia. The end of day 2, the merciful end of day 2. It was a lot of fun, don't get me wrong. I am very, very happy to have ridden today. The mileage was right on point, and I would have to say it feels really good now that I'm in camp to look back and say, yep, survived that. Even though I guess that's a kind of a quality type 2 fun. The weather was nice and cool to start, as I talked about, and got progressively hotter. I feel like I'm a broken record. But most importantly, I kind of had to race against time to get to the campground before the weather really took a turn. Right now, although the weather app says it's 90, I don't think it is. The clouds have come up, the sun is very much hidden, and the storms are on their way. It looks like that there's a big line of relatively heavy thunderstorms that will be here in about the next half hour from where I'm sitting here right now. And so my job right now is to kick back and relax and cool down a little bit, because I think I'm going to be stuck in my tent for the better part of the early evening, if not in for the duration. It's just a question of how those storms kind of angle up here. They are coming sort of at an angle and coming from the southwest, and it could be that they just sort of go right through, and it's a good direct hit, or they could slide up and at that angle, and I could be getting this constant state of heavy rain for a while. All right, that'll do it. Rain coming in the next 30 minutes or so, and I'll sort of wait till then, grab the hammock, pull it in so it doesn't get soaked, and jump in the tent, listen to more of my audiobook, and maybe go to sleep early. We'll see how that goes. And then I got about 63 plus a couple of miles to get home. So it's about more mileage than I've been doing, about 65 miles tomorrow to get home. But because I'll be going home, I will not worry so much about a variety of things. But it is interesting. Brunswick, as we had mentioned, I should say before I sign off here, Brunswick was where I was going to get breakfast, and I've got Brunswick and Pointer Rocks, and after that it's real quiet, really, until DC. He was saying White's Ferry, that place is super hit and miss whether that's open. In fact, it's so frequently not open, I never bank on it. There's a bunch of vending machines and a snack bar around mile marker 16, but look, I'm going to have something to eat long before then, so I'm hoping to find something in Brunswick tomorrow morning, so you will hear about it here. Good morning from Harpers Ferry, outside of Harpers Ferry, still at camp at Huckleberry Hill. Mile marker 63. So, last night, believe it or not, no thunderstorms came through this campground. Not a drop of rain, even though it was really, really threatening. However, south of here, basically between here and DC, the degree of thunderstorms that hit DC and the trail were pretty bad. A ton of rain, a ton of wind. Hail that, I'm looking at Twitter images. that were ping pong sized and in some cases a touch larger than that. So I think that this is a good reason to call off this last part. I feel like I call off so many of these trips here in Harpers Ferry for all sorts of reasons. I've had mechanicals, I've had all other kind of stuff. This one is just kind of an enjoyment issue. I feel like that the likelihood of a few things happening are very high. Number one, I think that there's probably a cajillion trees down. There already were a few trees down. There were reports of several trees down. But I think after a storm like that with 60 mile per hour gusting winds and more, that probably took down a ton. So I'd be going over a ton of trees. Secondly, the trail conditions will have deteriorated a lot with that much rain that quickly. I think that it's going to be a big mud bath in a few very gnarly spots. And they would be in bad places, especially towards the end of my riding when it would be at its hottest. 3, even though the rains came through, it's still hot and it's still going to be hot and muggy. And frankly, it's taken a lot out of me. Last but not least, and this is a bigger question mark, but still entirely possible and would be a real tough place for me to be blocked, would be at that low water crossing. I don't know for sure, but that the water levels always rise after a big thunderstorm. And if they rise above that crossing, and if it's pretty rapid, then I wouldn't be able to physically go over it. And then I'd have to, I guess I could get a shuttle service, etc. But, when all is said and done, that's kind of the least of my worries at that point. I think that finishing the tour or having the tour end here, it's a more positive way to look at it. Having the tour end here is probably the more enjoyable, interesting way to do it. It's not even I know I'll be back here. I'm already planning on doing kind of a 3-day-ish ride with Bellstar out to here and back, or even just a couple of days out to here with her and take the train back. So, I know I'm going to be doing that segment of the trail again. I've already done it again this year. It's a bummer that I wasn't going to be able to finish it. I could, but I just don't think it would be very enjoyable. I think that these 2 days were fun, but they were sort of at the limit of being fun. They were with the conditions that we're at. That's the one thing about going out on tour when the conditions are less than favorable and kind of push you to your limits. It's nice. It's good to be able to prove that you can do it. But sometimes it's just not worth going out there to create Sufferfest 2019. And that's what I think the rest of the day would be. And it also makes it easier when I'm sitting here, a couple of miles away from an Amtrak train that leaves, in the late morning. And, I think that that's certainly a factor. If I wasn't anywhere near a conveyance to get back, I'm sure I would have considered pushing through. But, I'd like to get back at a reasonable hour. I've got dogs in the daycare and I've got actually work to do. So, there's a bunch of reasons to pull the plug on this and then, come back another day. I'll tell you what, the fall is going to be terrific. I'm really looking forward to coming back and doing some of this trail in the fall, whether they're just overnights or whether there's just more of exploration and adventure. But for this tour, I think that pushing through the heat index, getting terrible sleep because it didn't drop below 80 until the middle of the night. It's been good. It's classic DC area riding in the teeth of the summer, which is why I tend not to do a lot of it. Spring and fall, that's your time. But you can get a good ride in during the summer, and I feel like I've already proven that. So, anyways, more to come down the road. But for this trip, we're calling it a tour at the end of the second day of riding here in Harpers Ferry. Hope you enjoyed all of this, and we will talk more in the post-tour chats.
All right, so that ended up being the end of the tour. A few things from all of this that happened off of the microphone afterwards. Turned out that storm trashed much of the trail south of me. I saw a Facebook post of somebody who was catching the train from DC back west on the following day. They started from Harper's Ferry. They weren't at Huckleberry Hill, so they must have been maybe at a B&B or at some other spot somewhere nearby. They said they barely made it back in time for their 4 p.m. train. It was super hot, there was super high humidity, and there were a ton of trees down between them and Washington, D.C. That said, the C&O has rebounded really, really nicely since then. It's been a remarkably dry August, all things considered. And conditions for my ride, though they were super hot and super humid. Hey, did I mention it was hot and humid on that ride? They were pretty ideal. I just drew the short straw with that storm, and ultimately, I really made the right call. I hauled my bike from the campsite after I finished recording. Well, I rode from there to what I like to call the Hillary Step. I hauled the bike with all of its panniers and everything up that thing. It's this big circular staircase that you have to climb in order to get to the bridge that crosses the Potomac to get to Harper's Ferry. It's something I don't love doing, but I was able to do it no problem. I think I was traveling light enough that it wasn't so bad. And plus, I think I finally figured out the right technique to do it too. So, by the way, we call it the Hillary Step, not because it's named after it's named after Sir Edmund Hillary. It's a part of the Everest climb. If you're familiar with mountaineering, it's kind of the hardest, gnarliest part of the mountain in a lot of ways, just like this staircase is. Anyways, I got to Harper's Ferry. I had a nice lunch. I had a local beer. It was really nice. I climbed down the train and I returned in air-conditioned comfort. And after reading that post from that person who had to ride back through a bunch of downed trees and heat and humidity like you're in HE double hockey sticks, man, I think I made the right call. Trail will be back. I'll be back too. Statistics for the last part of Tour Journals Volume 16. Sweltering summer on the C&O. Miles biked 62. Raindrops felt 0. Thunderstorms dodged 1. Staircases climbed 1. Trains trained 1. Flats 0. Mechanicals 0. And as always, we'd like to close out the show with a special shout out to the Pedalshift Society. Because of support from listeners like you, Pedalshift is a weekly bicycle touring podcast with a global community, expanding into live shows, meetups, tour journals, you name it. If you like what you hear, you can support the show for $5, $2, or even $1 a month. And there's one-shot annual options if you're not into the whole small monthly thing. Check it all out at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lean, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Keith Nagel, Brock Dittis, Thomas Skadow, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Harry Telgadis, Chris Barron, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Stuart Buchan, Mr. T, Roxy Arning, Nathan Poulton, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LaGreco, Paul Culbertson, Scott Culbertson, Cody Forchinger, Tom Beninati, Greg Braithwaite, Sandy Pizzio, Jeff Muster, Seth Pollock, Joseph Quinn, Drew Porter, Byron Patterson, Joachim Robert, Ray Jackson, Jeff Fry, Kenny Mikey, Lisa Hart, John Denkler, Steve Hankel, Miguel Quinones, Alejandro Aviles Reyes, Keith Spangler, Greg Towner, Dan Gebhardt, Jody Zeranin, Lucas Barwick, Michael Baker, Brian Bechtal, Reinhard Biggle, Greg Middlemiss, Connie Moore, William Gothman, Brian Benton, Joan Churchill, Mike Bender, Rick Weinberg, Billy Crafton, Gary Matushak, Greg Letoile Lopez, James Sloan, Jonathan Dillard, John Funk, Tom Bilch, Ronald Paroli, Dave Roll, Brian Hafter, Misha LeBlanc, Ari Messinger, and David Grotke. And thanks also to all past and anonymous donors for helping make this show happen. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedalshift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.